Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is another episode of the SoapyRao show. And today I've got a very, very interesting gentleman who's got a lot of stuff to share with all of us. He's a senior associate director at Princeton University's McGraw Centre for Teaching and Learning. Mr. Nic Voge, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining me.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
I just took a chance after watching your TED talk, and I said to Somnath, just write to him because I think it's very important in these times of so much information and so much uncertainty, especially, of course, with the pandemic, but of course, with even the internet and with social media, with YouTube and these get rich quick and get famous quick videos to talk about these things. And you've done it so beautifully in your talk about self-worth. So I wanted to reach out and thank you so much for replying and getting on a call before this, and we had a great chat, and now to agree to the recording and sharing what your research in the past years of your teaching, and best part is teaching people how to teach and teaching people how to learn. That's so important. So thank you, first of all, for doing this.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to exploring the questions and issues with me. It's a continued process of exploration, and everybody is aware of themselves. Everybody has a relation to themselves. And so they're a wealth of information about this thing that I'm trying to understand,
Right. So,
including you.
How did this begin? Because, okay, maybe we can sort of compare where it started to today, where we're living in a time where there's so many tools for teaching and learning when it comes from online resources to the traditional college, university, school systems to maybe even these online apps. When I say these teaching apps, these sort of forums where you have these quick bites of information, to even lectures being recorded and freely published for people to learn who can't afford university or can't attend university for whatever reason, to this conversation about the traditional ways of teaching being a little, outdated, or maybe standardized testing being an unfair way of evaluating students. There's so many conversations, but all of this kind of just went to the back burner when the lockdown happened, right? And it just all went to online. So from your experience as an academic and as a member of the center where you focus on teaching and learning, what is the significant sort of transformation you've seen over the past 2 years?
Well, there, as you pointed out, so many changes. I think in the college context, where I work with, that's residential, where students live and study and even work on campus, what we've realized is how important these interstitial interactions, just the connections with students, having the basis of a personal relationship, being in the presence of other people, around the academics, the formal studying of class time or writing a paper or working on a homework assignment. Those are so crucial to creating an attitude and orientation, energizing people to engage in the hard work of learning. It's also a site where we might share, hey, I heard this in my class and I'm telling you about it. That's actually a crucial part of solidification of learning and knowing. So that one piece, and I think there's a comparable part of, in my view, of being present with other people as a source of engagement, meaningful engagement, motivation, intention, even that can be replicated, or at least approach it through some of the more advanced technology that you have. I'd say actually it's not replicated, but approached. And so it's better than a correspondence class, or for many people, or simply reading texts. But I think for most people, it's insufficient or inadequate to actually being co-present and having that back and forth exchange. And we're, the humanness of reading other people and being engaged by our relationships as a basis for being engaged with the content, which is crucial to learning it.
Yeah, when I look back, because I had a chance to do my undergraduation in both the UK and the US, right? And in the UK system, it's a much bigger class strength, right? So you have these big lecture halls with 300-400 students, and then you have these smaller seminars or tutorials where you kind of interact with a smaller subgroup within your class, where a teaching assistant or one of those people would kind of guide you into the finer points of the lecture. And then I did the smaller liberal arts format where it was 30 people in a course, whether it's your major or if it's just a part of the liberal arts program. And honestly, I wasn't a great student. I, did,
Mhm.
I don't really. I remember, of course, my professors, the interaction, and they would monitor how you're coping with certain classes. Like I took Spanish as a second language, and then I just couldn't cope with it because I didn't. And then they realized, oh, you don't need a second language. You come from India, where you do have a second language, so you don't need
Mm.
this. But I'm talking about just the interaction, and more importantly, living on a college campus away from home,
Mm.
making
Mhm.
all those interesting choices, let's call it that,
Mhm.
and which you look back on going, oh man, some of it was so. I'm so lucky I got away with just as it was, as opposed to something more severe and long lasting. But
Mm.
all those things, I feel, in many ways, like living with a roommate, living independently, and if you add my vision situation in there, being protected for a large part of my life by being at home and things being taken care of, to kind of fending for myself, like cooking and cleaning and doing laundry.
Mhm.
It's very simple as it may seem to many people, but I feel that was a lot more rewarding in if you want to call it life skills, but it gave me a sense of, okay, this is, there are consequences to your actions, and you can't just be
Mm.
a spoiled student saying, I'm just going to study and go back to my room and study. But there's so many other aspects of life you kind of tune into.
Absolutely. I really relate to that first comment you made about feeling fortunate looking back that
Yeah.
perhaps evaded some consequences, even though there are many more that we encounter as an adult or
Yeah.
emerging adult on a college campus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there one way to look at it, not to go too deep, but I think we learn about ourselves by doing things. We gain confidence. I think we can only gain confidence by actually doing things, not by
Hmm.
simply thinking things or feeling things. We
Yeah.
have to do them and then reflect and then gain some sense of competency,
Yeah.
a confidence, even that I don't know how to do it, but I could figure it out, for instance. And
Mm.
my belief is that it was only through action.
Yeah.
Mm.
This doing things, it sort of leads nicely into your talk, which you gave about procrastination. And, it's such a nicely put connection where you say there's this sense of ability, which is your innate talent, sorry, your fundamental skill, as you might associate it with, um, which connects to um, achievement as a result, which connects to your idea of self-worth.
Yeah.
And that's sort of this thing which I spoke about up top, which is in this world where you're constantly flooded with worth being attached to either monetary, what do you call it, valuation, or social media status when it comes to your number of followers, the number of likes, or the endorsements, to videos telling you that you can be the next influencer, to videos telling you that you are the superstar, to this other idea of cancel culture saying that you can only do it if you
Mm.
follow these certain guidelines and this framework
Mhm.
which has been approved by a certain group of people. And also that is determined by what is being fed to you because of the certain consumption pattern you might have, right? So how is this, I think maybe just for people who haven't had a chance to watch your talk, maybe if you could just sort of talk about this idea of ability, achievement, and self-worth, and just give them context to uh, where your studies and the research you've spent over the past 20 odd years or maybe more in
Mm.
this space.
Yeah. Well, you laid it out very well. So, self-worth theory, as an approach to motivation,
Hmm.
particularly to procrastination, has been researched and studied for decades before I started it. So it
Hmm.
was 4 or 5 decades now. But I think the dynamics are magnified on the current context and in the context of social media, United
Hmm.
States context of achievement and performance, and so much of our lives being observed by and evaluated and judged by other people. But
Yeah.
so we'll circle back to that. But self-worth theory asserts that all of us as human beings have a need to achieve, to feel accomplished, to be
Hmm.
recognized for our accomplishments. And this is actually a crucial part of well-being. It's not simply some egotistical desire to be better than somebody else. That can be part of
Yeah.
it, certainly, but there is a need to feel accomplished. And many researchers and inquiries and approaches have recognized this. It may be expressed differently in different cultures, but this seems to be widespread. And so, if we
Hmm.
have this fundamental need to feel capable and able, and that this is determined by ourselves and others by our performance,
Yeah.
So in
Absolutely.
school context, and I'm going to use that because whether we're in school now or not, most people listening will have gone to school. So we all have this shared experience.
Hmm.
So um, the students who get good grades frequently get then attributed to, well, they're the good math. They're good. Not only they get a good grade in math, they're good at
Hmm.
math. And that often becomes literally, well, they're the good students
You
in
know, that's
math.
that example doesn't hold truer than it does in India, where everything is associated to your academic achievements. You know, when you just said that, it's absolutely
Mm-hmm.
that good in studies means a good person, bad in studying makes you a bad person. You know, and I had this joke in stand up where this mother who's looking for a bridegroom for a daughter is like, oh, these guys are great. That fellow, he may be a rapist, but at least he has an MBA. You know. I mean, and it's a bit of a dark example, but it is the
Uh-huh.
truth where people are like, oh, you know, he's horrible or she's horrible as a person. She does this, but at least she's a PhD. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, I just wanted to interrupt you there for that because that is so. I mean, this leads to a sort of, I call it a sickness where parents so we have these so-called premium institutions in India called the National NIT, the National Institute of Technology, the IITs,
Mm-hmm.
the Indian Institute of Technologies, like these IIMs. They're sort of like the Ivy Leagues, right? And you would be surprised. The competition is so high, and parents put their kids into these coaching camps, as they call them, which are these training programs, at the age of 9 or 10 for these exams,
Mm-hmm.
which are given at the age of 18. It's crazy. So why does that happen? Maybe it's a bit too vague a question as why does that happen? But you know because you said this has been studies which have been going on for a while, but this idea of achievement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which as a result, maybe I can use the word external validation, where people perceive you as a certain thing based on achievement. Why is it so important for A, an individual, and B, a larger collective?
Yeah. Well, I think that there are real material consequences of performance. Let's not pretend that there aren't economic and perhaps marital benefits of
Mm,
achieving, right? So that's real.
yeah.
And so saying to someone, "Oh, don't worry about the grades, just focus on X, Y, or Z," I
Mm,
think is misguided. It's mistaken. It's not true.
yeah.
The problem becomes when we have a single-minded focus on
Mm,
ability and achievement above all else. Not
yeah.
only, and this isn't some moral consequence. I'm not saying that's morally wrong. I'm not here to make any moral judgments.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the motivational consequences and the consequences to well-being.
Hmm.
So, but from a self-worth point of view, what the reason it's called self-worth theory is because the assertion is that the paramount human need is to feel worthy, to be perceived by one, and that we feel worthy in our community, in our context, and in ourselves, most people, because of their sense of their ability, what they're capable of. We carry around this set of assumptions that you just mentioned, this interlocking beliefs that my ability
Hmm.
points to or is largely predictive of my performance, what I achieve.
Yeah.
And then that tells people and myself that I'm worthy or I'm valued, and worthy of validation.
Yeah.
And so if that's the paramount human need, then the one corollary to that is we're willing to trade off other things. So the joke
Mm,
that you made is, hey, in a world where ability is the most important thing, and then achievement, we're willing to trade off other things that
yeah.
seemingly would be of worth. Like that's a good person, or they're not a good person. And
Yeah.
there's some fundamental dynamics in procrastination where this comes up. So
Mm,
people procrastinate because they really want to achieve. Their often cases many people think, oh, I'm not motivated. In fact, it's because we care. We only procrastinate about things we care about, that are
yeah.
meaningful to us, that are significant to us. So it's a bit of a paradox. It's more of a bit of it is a paradox, a
Yeah.
puzzle. If I care, why am I not pursuing it? What's actually even more important uh, than achieving is to maintain a sense of myself as able and capable, skilled.
Mm,
And that's the point, that we trade off. So we're also willing to trade off other things to maintain or to pursue a sense of ability, capability of achievement.
right. No, I think you put it beautifully. Like when you said that there's a sort of a stalemate between extreme motivation versus this dread of failure, right? And these
Mm-hmm.
forces kind of counteract and leave you at this place going, oh man, what am I going to do? And you know, you mentioned ability, achievement, and self worth. But I'm just going to, I think when we spoke on the call, I told you about this disability and
Mm,
achievement and self-worth. And
mm,
I'm just, as my example, if you can use it as a point to maybe explain this, is, this idea of everything um, being done for validation, and as a result your worth is directly related to the activities you do. Now, of course, just to give you a context, like maybe early years I just did, right, and I just did, thinking the more I do, the less the disability will be picked on or stand out in society. So they'll probably be like, oh, this guy does everything, he's one of us, he's normal, right? And
mm,
that was the achievement, to be normal, to not be a disabled person.
mhm,
As a result, it was filled with a bunch of things for achievement. Like, I would play a sport, I would do this, I would play the piano, but none of it. And then the reason I'm saying it is because you fast forward from then to now, I just want to compare the two. So that was just this constant pursuit of activities, which would then result in identity, which would then result, if those did well, my identity would go up, and if I didn't do well in those, my identity, self-worth would take a hit. And fast forward to 2020 in the lockdown, where it just sort of manifested in massive anxiety and panic attacks, going, oh my God, if I do badly at a comedy show, if I'm not funny as a comedian, it means I'm a shit human being,
mm,
And now I kind of stripped that away. And if you ask me, was it a remapping? No, I would call it an unlearning of the ways I was
mm,
doing things, and just breaking down to basics and stripping it all down, which was terrifying, because you have this thing going, oh my God, I'm nothing without that. But then saying, you know what, it doesn't really matter, because even if you are holding on to all these things, nothing's going to happen. If you take it away, nothing's going to happen. And I know it's putting a long process in a very sort of short format, but that's exactly what happened. And now I'm doing things not based so much on what people will think of me, not what the achievement will do for my image or my status, but just because, if it means picking up the guitar again and learning, it's about, okay, you know what, I might not be in a band by next year, but I'll at least play it better than I played it 3 months back or 6 months back. Or for that
Well,
matter, doing, yeah, sorry.
I'm curious, what's the effect of this
It's
shift
it's it's mind
on
blowing.
yourself, on your experience?
It's mind blowing because you know, this idea we have of holding on to a certain thing and not letting go. Like, for instance, if you say something as simple as learning a new chord, right? Or if you, like, I took back golf up after many years because I'm like, you know what, let me hit the ball. And after a lesson last week, I hit the ball really well. Then I was afraid, going, don't touch anything, don't change anything, because you don't ruin that
Mm,
swing.
mm,
And I said, leave it, because if you hit a golf ball well in the last class, forget that.
mm.
And I was talking to this mind coach, and he said that's a really important thing that he teaches, is letting go, trusting in yourself and letting go. And I think that has helped me a lot by not worrying about the outcome as much as enjoying the experience. I
Mhm,
know it sounds
mhm,
romantic, but it really has helped me. Like, if I don't wake up early and meditate one morning, it's not like, oh my God, you're a horrible human being, how could you skip your
mhm,
meditation, everything you've done is. And I'm like, you know what, I don't let other people saying, oh, you woke up late, affect me. I don't let the inner dialogue, because I think when it comes to
mhm,
self-worth, you are your starting point. And if you don't respect yourself, or you don't think of yourself as a worthy person, and that's when it starts, and everyone else's narrative towards you, whether it's family and friends, or even people, how they look at you, is all based on that. And I think there's a way, I don't know if this is even can be accounted for, but I think you'll be great to talk about this. But do people sense that energy when you yourself have low self-worth?
That's a really good question. I think some of us do, some people do. We can sense it at different levels too. So I think we may sense people grasping, or they're striving. We may feel, just to pick
Mm-hmm.
up this last point you made, that we are an instrument to somebody else's sense of feeling better about themselves. I think we
Mm.
probably all experienced that.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
someone wants to feel better about themselves, they may put us down, or they may use us, or we may felt by that. Um,
Manipulate, right? Yeah.
right. So that's one way. I think other times we might sense someone's I was going to say fragility, but that word's used so many other times. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say vulnerability
Yeah, yeah.
of to our judgments or other people's judgments, and we can see that in them,
Hmm.
and maybe we have some empathy and sympathy. I think we've all felt that.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we can perceive that, particularly if we have a lens. So one of the benefits of a self-worth theory, which is a research-based way of thinking,
Yeah.
is it gives us a lens on our own, on ourselves, to look
Hmm.
inward and say, oh, there are these things operating when I was a college student I didn't even realize. There is things
Mm.
operating now that I
Yeah.
didn't operate because I didn't have a lens that was burnished or polished for me to be able to see that. Then the question is, what do I do with that knowledge, that perspective? Can I apply it to other people and
Mm.
understand, for instance, that we all need to be validated as human beings? That's not a weakness. It's not a problem.
It's I think a
Um,
need, right, for a human being.
that's how I understand it. It's a
Right.
fundamental human need to be part of a community.
Mm.
It's a truism and maybe a cliche where human beings are social creatures, and so what is the consequences of that in terms of worth, and then the values of the community. So that's
Mm.
certainly the argument of self-worth theory, that it's built into the organism. As human beings, we have a need, and therefore we have a drive, and we're going to
Yeah.
feel those impulses to protect our sense of participation and inclusion in the group. And if the basis of that is on ability, then
Mm.
we're going to protect our sense of ability.
Mm. Do
So
you
if
do?
you think
Yeah.
about college, let's give you one concrete example for you and your listeners. If you've
Yeah.
ever been in a study group of some kind and you're working on your statistics problem set or your math,
Mm.
and the group's moving forward and you're confused
Mm.
and you're trying to keep up, and
Hmm.
you're
Yeah.
probably spending as much time monitoring what other people are thinking about you.
Yeah.
Do they think I'm dumb? Should I be able to do this? Are they smarter than me? Are they moving faster? That's the
Yeah.
internal dialogue.
Yeah.
And it can happen that quickly. And to the extent that we're doing that, we're not thinking about the math, the physics, the statistics. And so that's going to be harder to learn. But we also frequently don't actually ask. We don't say, I'm confused.
Mm.
I'm not following. And part of that is certainly, I want you to perceive me in a certain way. But we
Yeah.
might, and that's an important dimension to self-worth theory. But there's another piece like, oh, do I belong in this study group? Can I keep up with you all?
Yeah.
um, and that motivates us as well. And I'd say the one consequence briefly is that to the extent that we're thinking that, we're not present in the moment. So you talk about letting go, even of a good thing, to the
Mm.
extent that we're holding on to a positive thing
Yeah.
that's in the past, we are not fully in the present. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not making any kind of moral ethical judgment, but if it's
Yeah.
the present moment, you're trying to perform again that
Mm.
task and it's challenging, then any part of your consciousness, your attention, your intention is outside of that event or activity, then you're going to do less well. It's that simple.
Yeah. It's um yeah, I still have nightmares, which not, I wouldn't say nightmares, but I still have dreams which are filled with moments of, oh my God, I woke up late for the exam. I'm missing
Mm,
class. And strangely, this thing you mentioned about the study group, it apparently works the same way in comedy audiences, right? When, say, there are 100 people and 10, or say the, not even majority, but a good number, good percentage laugh, say 40 people, the other 60 automatically start laughing because they don't look stupid. They don't look like the people who didn't get the joke. And
mm-hmm,
even now, if you take it beyond that, there are a group of people saying, I didn't get that joke, AKA, I didn't find it funny, AKA, I'm
mm,
offended.
mm,
And, so that's where I want to lead that to this idea of when an individual believes that he or she or whatever they identify as has
mm-hmm,
low self-worth, it takes a lot to look within and say, my God, I have all these systems that I've built in, which are either sort of
mm-hmm.
defense mechanisms, these ability mechanisms, these success-based achievement mechanisms. And instead of saying, oh, are they right? And should I change it? Or it's easier to let, how do I put it? I think there's this sense, okay, and maybe I'll take it a step back. Maybe when you become a part of a group, you kind of compromise a little bit of who you are for the larger group.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when there are a lot of people in that group who don't want to address their issue of worth and identify with the larger cause, whether it's rights or an activism or whatever the word is, whether it's food or whether what they eat or what kind of political ideology, I think what happens then is the individual, all those values a person holds goes and is diminished for this one thing, because everyone's like, you know
Mm,
what, this is what my worth is attached to. And if someone says, whether it's transgender rights, whether whatever the rights may be, right, I don't take any particular issue or group, it happens across the board in my experience, and correct me if I'm wrong, if these these observations are completely off point, but I sense this is when people are so attached to their cause or their belief that this is them, that every other part of them which makes them this complex, beautiful human being is taken away by this one thing, which is like, oh my God, they're attacking us. So
Mm.
why is more and more of that happening? I mean, if you want to connect this to self-worth theory, like why is this day and age creating more of these, um, what is the group? Maybe the groups or these sub cultures or subgroups.
Very provocative point. To be frank, I hadn't thought too much about that, but let me let me summarize what I hear and then draw a more familiar example. Then maybe we can extrapolate back to
Sure, sure, sure.
what we're seeing operating in certainly what I see in the American context.
Mm,
So what I heard you say is when we care about something really deeply, and then we begin to identify with it.
mm,
Uh, so it can happen in lots of ways. I am a Democrat.
mm,
I am a biologist.
mm,
I'm a lawyer. I'm a big brother. It's not just
mm.
that that's what I do, it's what I am.
Yeah, yeah.
And as certain aspects of our identity become even more invested into these terms, these categories, then the
Labels.
stakes
Yeah,
go up.
yeah.
We feel in greater imperative to do that. So here's the example that I was going to start with. So one thing I see when students come to college and on to graduate school, a lot of times what happens is you become more specialized. You
Mm,
lose a certain aspect of your identity,
yeah,
or aspects. So maybe you were a guitar player in high school, and then when you went on to college, well, I have less time and I'm doing this thing. So for me,
yeah,
I was really into sports. That was my
yeah.
identity growing up. I wasn't
Mm,
much of a student in college. I was fine in high school, I should say,
mm,
good enough to get to a decent college, but certainly was not outstanding. I was better athletically, frankly, but
yeah.
I was not good enough to achieve at the college level. And so I
Mm,
lost that part of myself. I wasn't fully aware that was happening.
yeah,
Um, but I became, so my identity becomes more connected to academics.
yeah,
Now the stakes are up. I am a blank major.
yeah. I was just
Ooh.
gonna. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh, so if my worth is attached that into the performance,
yeah.
then I can feel that more strongly. And I don't have other sorts of ones. I feel that more strongly. It's more fundamental to me. It's more central to my self concept. And I
Mm,
don't have other sources of affirmation, of enjoyment, of being engaged, losing myself. And so if I'm doing poorly there or I feel threat, it's not even that I do poorly, it's that I feel the threat of doing poorly. Then I'm anxious.
yeah,
Um, and that, and a sense of anxiety over time and even briefly really interrupts and intervenes in our experience. So number one, we don't feel good if we're feeling anxious. It's really hard to feel both good and anxious.
yeah.
Um,
And then you
it
develop
directs
coping
our
mechanisms. Yeah,
we're often then defensive
yeah,
because in a state of fear, we're going to defend, we're going to protect.
yeah,
That's, again, I would argue is built into the organism.
yeah.
So there are certain dynamics that I can see how might be applied to the situations you're describing, right? Again, I
Mm,
haven't given it too much thought, frankly. But I can say when I identify this is, and is there a certain sort of test of my identity, right? So my in academics, so the self-worth theory is focused on achievement, but the
mm,
exam, the grades are a sort of test of my identity. Am I really a physics major? Am I cut out to be a
mm,
doctor? Can I
yeah,
be an engineer? These are really specific, concrete assessments. At least I can interpret them as that. And
yeah,
so maybe there's an equivalent, right? If you're for us or you're against us. This is a very
yeah,
clear line.
yeah, yeah.
So that could be operating. I don't know. I can't say what that feels like from within some of the categories of identity that people feel
Yeah,
maybe that is targeted or marginalized in ways. I'm a pretty conventional looking guy, and I
yeah,
am. So I won't speak to other people's experience. It's not that I've never lived in a place where I haven't been on the fringe. I lived in Japan
yeah,
in the 80s with not a lot of white folks, and it's not to make a comparison to what's going on,
yeah,
but I knew I stood out, and
yeah.
people were aware of that. And I had some definitely complicated feelings about that. I definitely did not feel good. And I remember feeling, even with a privileged status of a white person
Mm.
in Japan, there were times too that I felt slighted. I knew I was slighted in various ways, and so that was instructive in the end. It was helpful to experience that.
It's such a weird time. I mean, because it's gone from one extreme where people say you would say, oh, brown people are discriminated against, or black people are discriminated against. And of course, I'm not undermining racism, or not the fact that racist people do exist or racist concepts do exist. But I'm just using my example. When I lived there, there have been a couple of encounters where people, and I would say not white people, so to identify, but people have been nasty. And, if they happen to be white, they were white, or but for whatever the color, there are some nasty people in all groups, I think.
Mhm.
You know, and it comes from a sense of insecurity when you don't have this sense of worth in yourself. You want to put down other people, which you said
Mhm.
a little while back on in our conversation. And this happens across groups. In India, we're all Indians, we're all colored people. But within that, you have this construct of the caste system where, because there's this idea that the Brahmins, who are the priests who have this interpretation of the religious texts, they wanted to keep the other people down and used other things like darker color, cleanliness, and all these facts that these
Mm.
people, and it's across the board in different cultures, right? So
Mhm.
now in today's day and age, there's this sense that, within, like, say, American society, you have all these groups and you have one person to blame, and in America it's the white male, the straight white male, right?
Mhm.
And people are doing more and more of that. And this is my experience, and I'm of course not qualified as a researcher or any psychologist or any of those things, but just my experience, I hear this, is people, when they keep blaming someone or something for their condition or their situation, there's absolutely no, number one, sort of time or mind space to look at yourself and say, where can I start
Mm.
work? And secondly, there's no growth in society.
Mm.
And I feel this. As I told you, I'm not qualified, but I sense this as a human being, because there's just too much shouting, no one's listening, and everyone's just pointing fingers.
Mm.
And I don't know. I think it's just not, no one's going to benefit at the end of it, because I don't know.
I was thinking I'm going to make a statement that may seem unconnected at first, but hopefully
Yeah.
I can connect it. I was actually thinking about this morning. So I just did a little 10-minute walk before we sat down to talk.
Hmm.
And the thought that came to my mind was that there's a really powerful and positive motivation, I think, underlying much of these actions, which is justice. I think
Mm.
people are seeking justice.
Yeah.
And that I'm in favor of justice. That's
Yeah.
something I believe very strongly in, and fairness and equity.
Hmm.
And so I was thinking to myself, well, why shouldn't people pursue justice? Is there some principle that's more valuable or more significant to me
Yeah.
or others? And so the first thought was, well, if that's their primary objective, then I'm not here to judge that. That seems fine,
That seems fine.
good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The angle I might take actually is, what is the consequence of an individual feeling that is their responsibility? What is the consequence to themselves
Yeah.
of taking on creating justice in society as a whole?
Mm.
I think we do have a responsibility to do that as members of society, but I would want to look at the psychological consequences. I think it's a big burden.
Yeah.
It's very painful and hard to bear. And if people say, I'm willing to do it, again, great. I'm not questioning that. But
Yeah.
I think it's one of the consequences is people are in pain a lot of the time.
It's a lot of, and as you said, you're always on a high threat factor. You're like,
Mm,
where's the next comment going to come from? Where's the next injustice going to come from? And
mm,
I mean, I can, attribute to this because I lived in this cycle of thoughts, which was blame, shame, guilt, and fear, right? Where you
mm,
blame someone for your situation. It could be your parents, it could be society, it could be a God. Why did you do this to me? It could be
mm,
shame, but why am I blaming someone, and why? And be ashamed of who you are. It could be guilt because, my God, am I not doing enough? I mean, am I not worthy enough? And why have I said these things to people who love me? And then there's fear, like, what does the future hold for me? And now
mm,
if you quickly just change that to and and the blame, shame, guilt, and fear leads to this constant threat level, right? This constant thing. Where's the comment going? I'm going to fight, and I'm going to be like, I'm offended, how dare you say this to me, I'm disabled. And your identity becomes this person who's constantly on being cornered as an animal. But if you just take the
mm,
same thing to no more blame, no more shame, no more guilt, no more fear, where you just flip those words on in your feelings, not just saying it, where you say, you know what, I'm not going to blame anyone. I'm not going to be ashamed of who I am. I'm not going to be guilty for the things that happened in the past or of what I might say in that moment. And I'm not going to be afraid, because I'm just going to trust in myself and let go. And I bring this again because I feel if you do that as an individual, then I think as more and more individuals do it in their life, and I'm sorry, at the risk of sounding like a spiritual leader, I'm not
Hmm.
any of it, but this exactly, I feel, makes a collective of individuals who live this, as opposed to a group which is masking
Mm.
this sort of insecurity, you know?
Well, one thing I take away there is you talk about what you're going to do. I'm going to do this, and I think there's an
Yeah,
important difference between what an individual chooses to do in terms of what they choose to think, believe, and you talked
yeah,
about before about unlearning. We have to unlearn messages we've internalized. That
mm,
if we see in our societies people have these positions, they didn't all individually come up with this on their own. They're receiving these messages through socialization, media, etc. In any case,
yeah,
it's one thing to say I'm going to choose this and make these activities, another thing, and entirely in my view, then to prescribe that to other people.
yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, I
and to
think that's a very
proscribe
important
certain
point.
actions. And it's ironic, right? So people will sometimes talk to me about all these snowflake college students, and in
Yeah,
some
yeah,
sense, I think that it's some of the positions are unhelpful to them. I try to start with the point of empathy, meaning the students.
yeah,
But I also take the second point, which is for me to prescribe to them is not actually part of my values. I don't go around telling people what they should do. I don't hold that as a high value
yeah,
in my own framework. Now, if they do and they want to tell people what to do because that's a high value to them, then
mm,
that's their right.
yeah,
And it's consistent with their values more than a right. It's consistent with what they think is right. So that's one point. But this idea that something I found to be true and learned about my experience, how do we transfer that? How do we share that? This is the root of teaching and learning. And you
mm,
talk about spiritual. I study Buddhism. I'm completely secular. I'm not Buddhist. I'm not religious at
yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah,
But my understanding is the Buddha said, don't do what I said because I tell you. Do what I
yeah,
said because you experiment with it and you
mm,
find it to be true. So
yeah,
if you take your position and say, I found this to be true by virtue of my experience. I've acted this way. I've done the hard work of changing certain kinds of beliefs, and that led to different perceptions and
yeah,
feelings and
yeah,
emotions. And I'm in a place that my life feels quite different. And then tell other people, hey, give that a shot. If
yeah.
you're unhappy with where you are now.
Yeah, or even if you resonate with any of these thoughts or feelings, it could be,
Mm,
mine was blame, shame, guilt, fear, but yours could be anger, it could be
mm,
revenge, it could be malice, whatever it could be. But look at it, and I never preach, and I don't leave listeners with any sort of teachings, right? If they take something, well and great, right? If
yeah.
it's not a sort of self-help podcast. It's more a conversation with people who are doing great work like you, and that's the thing. And I think keeping the beautiful thing about spirituality we just mentioned is it gives you a set of tools to look at life with or lead life with. But
Well
religion, I feel
said.
sometimes is very sort of, I wouldn't say close-minded, but it's very narrow, saying you have to do these things. And of course, that's the misinterpreted form of religion, because in the religious texts are saying this is what we've noticed as humans who've gone before you has worked. So try doing this,
Right.
And if we looked at religion like that, I think it's a very cool thing. Saying, okay, we've noticed that killing too many people and being greedy isn't helpful, so try not doing that.
Hmm.
But we've obviously misinterpreted and saying take this aspect of it the way it's told by people who know better than you, and that, I think, that automatically sets a tone for we are going to tell you how to do it, which is, I don't think, the healthiest way.
Hmm. Yeah, I believe that a crucial step to well-being,
Mm.
to living a good life, is to develop our own understanding of reality, number one, and but more
Mm.
significantly, to understand the human condition. What does it mean to be human? And I
Yeah,
can't just read it. I can
yeah,
read it. That's helpful. And that could be in a scripture book, or it could be from research articles,
yeah,
it could be YouTube videos. But ultimately, I need to process that and understand the what it means to be human in this, which is part of a community, which we've been talking about, or many communities,
yeah,
and that is the basis then of my actions. So I think
yeah,
that living ethically is a really prodigious intellectual task, and so that's
yeah,
in my the last 5 years
hmm,
or more, I've taken on that as the task. Why do I act the way I do? How does the world work?
yeah,
How do I use that understanding of the world to act in ways that I want? Because a lot of times I haven't acted in ways that I wanted to. That's the root
yeah,
of procrastination. I have certain
yeah,
values, I have certain beliefs. I want to do something, and yet I can't make myself do it. So procrastination then is a really perfect puzzle to
Yeah.
examine the complexity of human behavior, because I want to act in certain ways and then I don't. Yet in
Yeah.
lots of parts of my life, I do automatically, easy, without reflection.
Yeah.
What's going on? And so, in my view, or at least in my journey, I've had to say, how does the world work? And then how do
Mm.
humans work? And then how do I work?
Yeah.
And I don't
Yeah.
mean produce, I mean, how do I operate in the world?
Mm.
And so it's been a many year process. And I didn't realize when I first started studying self-worth theory, which initially was just somebody was doing research on something that I had felt and I was deeply ashamed to talk about, but they were talking about it in ways that gave understanding. And I was blown away by that
Mm.
in a way that I'd never been blown away by an academic course.
Yeah.
But that has developed and evolved and grown and is a core of this larger initiative. What's something that motivates all people, including me, and so that I can understand what I'm doing and why?
Yeah.
And with much less judgment, right? With less
Yeah.
judgment of myself and others. And I think that's
And
the
it's very
basis of
hard to get to that
compassion.
place. Yeah, it's a base of compassion. I think it's very hard to do that because you're taught, you're kind of conditioned to believe that you can only be good compared to someone as opposed to just good
Mm,
as an individual.
hmm.
And I think the beauty is 7 billion unique life experiences is
Yeah.
what we should aim for. And I think that'll make a better world. But another thing which may be a point I think in a culture where procrastination is where people really procrastinate, as you said, on things they really want to do, but
Hmm.
they are scared of failure in that. But then what I sense is people are okay to do the things which are either hidden because larger numbers are doing, or mediocrity which is not judged, which goes unnoticed. But another thing which I feel has happened is, as a result, people don't want the failure to be attached to them. So as a result, you probably have noticed this: people copy on emails when work emails are going out. They BCC everyone, they CC
Mm,
everyone, because when shit hits the fan, they want to pass
hmm.
on the buck. And I don't know if that's connected to procrastination or self-worth, but
Hmm.
in corporates, you notice a lot of that where people are like, yeah, when things are good, you take the credit for it. When things go wrong,
Mm,
you kind of want to say, yeah, but I told him or her to do it, but they didn't do it right. And as a result, the product or the project isn't the best it can be because it's just people trying to not put their head above and get sort of noticed for taking a risk. And
hmm.
you see a lot of people who want to push, and actually, you take this because I think you've spoken about this a lot. The people who really want to do it and let the motivation override the fear of failure are the ones who, maybe the word is, are successful, who aren't scared, who end up doing what they do and are then applauded and then recognized for doing that truly good work.
Hmm. Well, to I'm going to use the example of the CCing the email.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, there are real material consequences of you want to insulate yourself from. So you CC because there's a trail and you want to be able to document that. And if
Yeah.
there's a risk, something goes bad. But
Yeah.
I think so. But the answer to that is for the individual to look inward. And so to the extent that we're acting in ways that are going to protect ourselves, that is different than acting in ways that are going to maximize our achievement or exploration or learning. So if we're in a
Yeah.
protective mode, we're in a
Yeah.
protective mode. It's really hard to do both. So the individual has to look inward. The same action can be motivated by two very, very different motivations.
Yeah.
So the quintessential example is I'm cleaning my refrigerator the night before exam because my refrigerator is dirty.
Yeah.
Well, it is dirty, but is that
Yeah.
why?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
The first is a reason. The second is a motivation.
Mm.
So am I cleaning the refrigerator so I'm not made anxious by the task of sitting down to study my physics that brings up feelings of inadequacy or confusion and frustration. And so the same action, two
Yeah.
very different motivations, and they can be both. We're
Yeah.
complicated beings. We can have multiple. But
Yeah.
so for the person who's seeing that, it's just actually to use this as a moment and say, well, what is motivating this? See this not as only an action, but as a mirror
Mm.
to look inward and say, what's motivating me here? What can I learn from this? Is that what I
Yeah.
want to be motivated by? It's not
Am I
that it's
doing this?
irrational, wrong, or bad. I'm sorry, go ahead. But that we can gain an understanding even from a little incident or event or activity like that.
No, that's amazing that you just put that in context, because if someone can copy everyone saying, "Hey, by the way, just letting you all know, this is the status of where the things are, so you guys can take from here. I mean, take it on, take it forward, as opposed to, hey guys, just check it out. I've done this, by the way. I've done this. I'm just letting you know. Don't blame me later. So that
Mm-hmm.
you're right. It's so in anything, and you mentioned that thing in your talk, right, where a lot of students would come before an exam. Oh, I just studied for 1 hour. So just to put it out there, in case I do badly, I've done only 1 hour. But in
Mm-hmm.
case I do amazingly well, you know that or you tell yourself, I'm truly amazing. I studied for 1 hour and I'm brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same
And
thing. Yeah.
we can recognize this as a fundamental human need and drive, and therefore
Mm.
hopefully not judge it quite so much. But I think um, one of the things you said there about mediocrity, a little thought that popped into my head the other day, and so I'll try it out. It's the first time I've said it to anybody.
Yeah.
Um, is that if we're going to live an authentic life where we pursue our deepest values and interests,
Yeah.
we must be prepared to be viewed by others as living a mediocre, largely meaningless life of lack of achievement. Because
Right.
if I do the things that matter to me, but they don't matter in society, then most people will look at
Mm.
me and say, yeah, what you're doing doesn't matter.
Well,
I have to be prepared to do that and deal with that consequence if I'm truly going to be
yes,
excellent
absolutely.
in the things that matter to me.
Yeah. No, truly authentic, because I'm going to do the jokes that I want to say, and it might not lead to a Netflix special or to the most famous comedian in the world, but I'm happy with that. And it takes a lot of courage, or I
Mm-hmm.
would say I don't have courage, but it's so, and thank you for sharing that on the podcast, because I was just listening to this interview with Bryson DeChambeau, the golfer,
Mm-hmm.
and he was talking about how he was talking to Chris Pratt, the actor, and the advice he got is, man, you got to live two lives. Or maybe I've misinterpreted this, but what he said is, when you're in the public eye, you have to play that act, so
Mm.
you are not letting all the negatives, especially the negatives and maybe the positives, get to your head or get to you and get to your being. So you live that act out there, but when you come home, you have to be your authentic self. But
Mm.
from what you just said now, being truly authentic means you're not living an act. What people are constantly seeing of you is you. And it's so much harder, right? Because, um, for instance, now when someone is doing what they really want to do, and they're not doing it for validation or external sort of recognition, um, then it's someone else might look at, someone just doing gardening because they love it, or living slowly because they love it, or not consuming as much because they want to
Mm-hmm.
do it, as a boring life. But they
Yeah.
might see someone like Jeff Bezos going, to subspace and spending $1 billion in a yacht as the most amazing thing, even though
Mm-hmm.
that might not be the most authentic way he's living. Of course, if he is, then nothing like it. But I'll give you an example, right? Because there are so many people who, do the perfect thing. They get a degree. They get academic tick boxes ticked, which is, the undergrad, the masters. They get their job. They get a high-paying job. They get stock options. They buy an apartment. They get a bigger apartment. But they are seen as success stories. But if you ask them, how do you feel? They're still
Mm-hmm.
anxious. They feel,
Yeah.
my God, I'm only identified by my job. They might not say it, but their conversations are always about, man, I hate my job. They're not getting a promotion. My
Mm-hmm.
team sucks. There's politics. I want to move to a bigger flat. I want to get a better car. I want to get more stocks because the person next to me got 5 million stocks. Whatever the thing is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. Do you think that when it becomes that feeding cycle for self worth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it never actually fulfills self-worth, or you never are able to realize your self-worth. Is there any sort of research for that, or have you noticed anything?
Not sure how much research, but there's certainly wisdom
Mm.
in the traditions and in the passed down in lots of cultures and societies and eras.
Hmm.
My observation is that we are right. So my starting point is people are seeking worth. If people are seeking worth in their bank account, they will
Hmm.
never achieve it. That is simply
Okay.
not the way worth is attained. It's not
Okay.
possible.
And why,
And
can you
so,
just break it down with a little more
mhm.
explanation, because I think that's really
Sure.
important for me to
Sure. So
understand as
I
well.
would say that's all, because it can't be achieved means people will continue to do that and continue to do that and continue to do that.
Like
So
an
if
endless loop.
you
Okay. Okay.
right, so if I'm trying to find my sense of my worth, self worth,
Mm.
by being a comedian and standing up and getting adulation, I'm
Mm.
thinking of the Robin Williams documentary I just saw.
Okay.
That this understandable as a human being that I would seek it seek my worth in that. But my
Yeah.
understanding of how self-worth operates, is you will never attain that. That self-worth is about an appraisal of myself by myself. There's a relationship between me and myself
Yeah,
and
yeah,
my
yeah.
actions and my thoughts and beliefs. And so
Not,
anything that's
yeah,
external to that, it may impinge upon it or influence it, but will never resolve that. Um,
yeah.
in in part because I know if I am inauthentic, I know or I believe I have certain beliefs about my insides and how they comport with my outsides. And in fact, that can actually increase the sense of schism
Yeah.
because I've achieved all these things by what other people value, but internally I've been a
Or the
failure. I've
void
compromised
gets
these things.
bigger. Yeah. Because I sense it doesn't become about, you mentioned Robin Williams. It doesn't become about how many people laughed, or did you get a better set, or did you become better as a performer. But then the byproducts start bothering you. How many specials, how many tickets did I sell, how many fans do I have? That starts coming in when you are looking for, your worth as a self from an activity.
Well, think about his example. And again, I haven't studied it too much, but
Yeah.
what was he known as? He was funny, but
Yeah.
he was known as his incredible mind, innate ability, this way to do things that no one else did. So he could
Yeah.
only go down from that at a certain point.
Mm.
And it was the operations of his mind. It's very much about ability, right? It's not just he's funny and
Yeah.
he's developed timing, and the nature of his humor was this kind of creativity, this genius,
Yeah. Yeah.
inherent, unchanging,
So he's already
distinctive,
up there.
unique.
Yeah, he's already up
Right.
there.
So again, I don't know the man. I didn't know anything. I've only
Yeah.
watched his one video. I mean, I was a fan certainly growing up,
Yeah, I
but I
love
can
him too. Yeah, loved
imagine
him too.
as
Yeah.
an illustration that if that's where we gain our defense, and even if the nature or the reason for our achievement is this quality,
Yeah.
and that quality has a shelf life, a duration, it's going to go down, then we can
Mm.
imagine that um, that discrepancy or the fear of that diminishment is a diminishment of who we are.
And that's
And,
holding
and
on, right? Again.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've internalized a certain belief, a set of beliefs. Number one, that is the definitive of my worth to other people. It's not just that I made them laugh, it's that I made them laugh by being a genius.
Hmm.
Do you see the difference?
Yeah. But why don't we
Um,
learn? If so many people have ended badly when it comes to just pursuing this unattainable goal of worth through activity or money. I mean, so many people have come down. Like, you hear
mhm.
stories, right? Like Jim Carrey after his massively success career. He's like, none of that means, none of it means anything at all. Peace of
Yeah.
mind and your true appreciation of your authentic self and understanding why you want to
Hmm.
do and why you want to do something because and doing it because you want to. That's what matters. And we have again and again over the course of
Right.
thousands of years heard it in different ways.
Hmm.
Why don't we learn as a society, as a civilization? Um, and this beautiful thing you said, there's a shelf life, right? Why can't we appreciate someone, say for instance, say Tiger Woods, who's a mind-blowing golfer, right? But we want that to last forever. And that pressure is reflected on the person, and then they end up going down the slippery slope where they can't sustain
Hmm.
it, and then it goes down another rabbit hole of you look at the things that they do off the golf course or off there. So why can't we appreciate someone who's amazing for one book or for one song or for one
Right.
year in their career, and that's
Hmm.
all they want to do, and that's all they can give because that's the potential they've reached. But we want them to drag it out. We want 10 more specials from Dave Chappelle. We want
Hmm.
10 more songs
Hmm.
from you two. Why do we have that? And why can't we just appreciate that? We call them a one-hit wonder. So
Right.
maybe you can give more light on this, and if it makes any sense at all, the question.
Hmm. Well, as you said before, there's some research on this. I think on the one hand, I'm immersed in the research on self-worth and motivation. I'm also try to learn from the wisdom of the ages.
Yeah.
So Buddhism, other in particular for me, but others have been observers of human beings, and that actually is empirical. So the one thing I would start first is I just want to understand. So you've noticed this is a common pattern. So
Mm.
to me, what that tells me is it's not even so much that humans are flawed, is that means there's an enduring reason why we're doing this. It's part of virtually all people.
Yeah.
So there's a drive, there's a need. And so to accept that and say, that's human.
Mm.
You are human if you're pursuing that. I'm
Yeah.
not going to
Yeah.
judge your humanity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if you say, I don't like the consequences of that, I don't like the way that this need is manifesting in my life. Then I'm happy to talk with you and try to help you deal with that. So
Yeah.
that's one point. Second is, I think human action is super complicated. We have
Yeah.
lots and lots of motivations. They meet each other obliquely. They're in opposition. They get us stuck. There's layers. Human consciousness is so complicated. We're
Yeah.
aware that we're aware that we're aware that we're motivated and feeling and perceiving and all
Yeah.
that funhouse mirrors of back and forth of our consciousness. So even if we want to change, but
Yeah.
I think so that's why it's hard to undo this. But I would say I think that our society, and I can speak mostly about American society, that's what I've been born and raised, is we've received these messages. So on the one hand, there's examples. I don't know Jim Carrey's story as much, but people have gotten through the other side and they said, here's what I've learned. And they're saying remarkably similar things.
Yeah.
What are my values? How do I align those? I want to choose things that are intrinsic to me. They're internal. When I'm too oriented toward the external, these negative things happen. This is the wisdom of the ages. Many people have said this. And very few people have said who I would consider wise have said things that are very different than that, actually. So there's a real coherence in that message. Yet most of us don't, including me.
Including me as well. As I just want to point out, none of this we're saying is there's no right or wrong way. It's all the human experience has so many elements to it. It's just that we're trying to identify the different shades of gray,
Yeah. So I think one of the obstacles is shame. Oh, I should already know this, or I should be doing this. Or I think frequently people either present or it is received that these observations are cast in a moral framework. It is better to be intrinsically motivated. No, I completely disagree with that. It is not better. It is simply a different kind of motivation. And if for you, the consequences of being intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically bring you greater happiness and well-being, then I would say do that.
Yeah.
So what research does is it tells you, hey, we found these findings when people are intrinsically motivated, when they have an internal locus of control, when they're driven by passion and interest, when they're driven by a desire to serve and help other people, they're happier. They often also perform better if that's important to you. So when your professor said, don't worry about the grade, just focus on the learning, although I don't like that formulation, there's a deep truth to that.
Yeah.
And they're speaking it from experience. They were fascinated by outer space or the workings of the human body or the human mind. And they were driven by that primarily. It's not that they didn't care about getting a good grade or getting a PhD or getting tenure,
but
relatively speak, right.
Yeah.
And at least they held them both.
Right.
And
these guys and gals and whoever who do that and practice that, they truly end up, the byproducts don't matter like fame, fortune, and results, but they truly end up outdoing it, right? Outdoing themselves.
Well, I've never been famous or rich, but but I suspect it matters some.
It does, but I'm saying just the process. As you said just now, it's so weird because this particular process of talking to you, this conversation gives me so much to think about and gives me satisfaction just to hear your thoughts on things that I've been thinking about. I don't know if it's going to, go viral. I don't know. I hope it does, but it doesn't matter to me. I really enjoyed this.
Can I just say one more thing there? One thing I felt, and I've observed in others, I remember feeling that my motivations needed to be pure. That if I'm in grad school and I've chosen this path, and so my path was to make college more equitable and accessible to people who otherwise wouldn't have that experience, and to unpack that and equip them and empower them. But I also wanted to have a good job at a good university. And I felt some real conflict around that. So the message I want to say is we don't have to have pure motivations. We are humans. We want to fit in. We want to achieve. We want to have material security. Absolutely. We want to have status. That's okay. We don't have to, don't judge yourself. That's okay. The question is, how does that influence our behavior and our choices? Does it conceal or obstruct our other motives, which is to serve,
Yeah.
So we can hold both those, and we don't have to
Yeah.
be a saint or a martyr.
I,
Um,
I think
what
that's
I
really
think
well
we
put.
want to do is be an observer and
Yeah.
accept, and then do the best we can with that. And I
Yeah.
think that the wisdom of the ages tells us that being tapped into our intrinsic motivations, our interests, our passions, being clear about what our social value, what we want to achieve in the social world is important. It's not which one those things are. It's the process of getting that clarity and then
Yeah.
aligning our values with our actions as best we can,
Yeah.
and of giving that grace to other people, that they're trying to do the same thing. And when we don't, we say, oh, no, that's me being a human being. Yeah, I'm a human being still, and I have these failings and these
That's so
foibles,
well put.
and
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I
yeah,
think it's very important because I think all of us like to buy stuff, go on a holiday. But
sure,
if that only becomes, if the problem is every time you're on holiday, you think of I want to be in a better holiday, that's the problem.
mm-hmm,
But I think if you
mm-hmm,
can balance it where, you can enjoy it because you enjoy doing X number of things on a holiday, what gives you,
right,
true satisfaction, contentment, happiness, whatever the word you want to use. And if you enjoy that on that thing, spending the money, and you use your time to make the money to go on that, I think it's great, and I'd love to do it as well. I don't think, but I read this book recently by Eckhart Tolle called A
mm,
New Earth, and I'm sure you've
mm,
heard of it and possibly even read it. In which there's a very important thing he says, right? He uses this in reference to parenting, where he says where it's a role versus a function. Now, if you take up parenting as a role, and he specifically spoke about it as parenting as a role, comes with the attachment of, he calls the ego, where
mm-hmm,
you put this sort
yeah,
of burden of your experiences onto this child, and you automatically create this child as an inferior who doesn't know as much as you, who's this young being who you have to mold into what you think is the right way, which is
yeah,
determined by the ego, and the worth is as a result attached to conditions, and it's not unconditional
mm-hmm,
love. Whereas the
right,
function comes as, it's my offspring, but I will give him as or her as much respect as a being, but I will protect, I will nourish, I will cherish this life as a life that is part of me, but I will not love it depending, love the child based on the results, or depending on how the child does. As a result, like if it listens to me, I will reward it. If it doesn't listen, then I will punish it. You know what I mean? So it's more
mm-hmm,
detached from the ego, and I found that really beautiful. And if we can apply that to things we do, like say for instance, you're a professor as a function, as opposed to a role, I think that's
mm.
a really cool way of. I think he put that across really well.
Really interesting. I have a book of or two of Eric Eckhart Tolle on my shelf here, but I actually have not read that book. I don't know that part of his message, but it resonates with another person that I've been watching and reading lately, Gabor Mate,
Okay.
and he speaks in very similar terms about the dilemma that a child faces in relation to the family, especially the parents, of
Mm.
living authentically, being oneself as one understands oneself,
Mm.
and but also needing attachment, needing security, love, and that the child frequently feels that they can't do the first in order to get the second. And so I think
Mm.
perhaps what Mate's work does explains what happens and how it happens if we, if as parents, and I am a parent,
Yeah.
and I've done this, and Mate has too, if we parent in the role versus the function, right? If we attach ourselves,
Mm.
and we make our love, our security contingent,
Mm. Mm.
um, and on what the child does.
Yeah.
Um, and then we learn that as people. And I think it's absolutely operating with self-worth. And then we learn that in school.
Yeah.
There's a way to read the story. It's what the author intended, and you didn't do that. And so
Mm.
you're trying to learn how to do that thing. And there's one way to solve the problem, and here's the method. And I'm trying to learn how to do that. Why? To get approval of the
Yeah.
teacher.
Yeah.
And so this is a fundamental dynamic. And so I think I think your question here is, as human beings, as parents, and again, I'm a parent, how do we inhabit this social role, but
Yeah.
also have this function relative, in this case, to our child and to ourselves?
Mm.
And to recognize that's a real dilemma. I'm not sure how Tolle
Yeah.
talks about that, but I would say, first of all, that is a dilemma.
He says to do it as a function, but I was just trying to understand because you kind of put it really well here. It's a dilemma, but how? And I think it goes back to the previous thing where you said where we have to live in this. We can't We can't detach ourselves and live as a hermit in a forest and say, my child's Mowgli and going to learn from the plants and the animals. So I think there is, it's very difficult to do either or.
Well, first of all, I have to say that Jungle Book is my all-time favorite movie.
Oh, okay. I
So
didn't know
you
this.
hit the nail
It's
on the head.
my favorite
Mowgli.
too. I loved it.
Okay.
Close second is
I,
Lion King, but yeah.
yeah. Finding if we're talking about parenting, then Finding Nemo is a wealth of insights about parenting. It's very
Mm.
much actually what you're saying. I'm not going to get into that, but
Yeah.
so now I'm getting into very personal territory because my daughter just went off to college, and
Oh, nice.
and so that's a moment where we reflect and look back. I think I could certainly have felt the tugs and the dilemma that Tole is talking about that you're recounting here, and this distinction between role and function. I guess I'm not sure about the word function there. I don't know if you could explain a little bit more. I
Well,
understand role because role seems like who I am in the world socially,
yeah. I think
even in relation to my child. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I think, just sorry for interrupting, but I think what I took from it is label versus
Mm,
um, the label of parent, which basically gives you attachment, gives you that what the child does reflects on you, and what you
right.
do kind of makes a
Hmm.
child into your extension. That's what I think is role and label. Maybe
Yeah.
it's the wrong or right word. Versus function is where you have to fulfill this activity as a being, or he called it
Hmm.
human and being. So the human had to do this function of basically looking
Mm,
after the offspring, but as an equal, giving all the things that that child needs to
right.
become a grown human. And
Yeah.
this sort of is another thing where, as your inner purpose and outer purpose. Inner purpose is to awaken, and outer purpose is to find a way for your awakening to find out. It gets a little confusing. I don't want to go into that too
Hmm.
much, but
Hmm.
he basically talks about the human and the being, and how the human has to do this thing in society, function as a person with all the various sufferings that come with life. But the
Hmm.
being's purpose is to go beyond the the material and find the true peace, the consciousness, and the connection that all of us have within us. I mean, if you let's read the book, you probably will understand it better when he says it. But this is my sort of takeaway
Yeah.
from what I read.
Well, it's a framework I hadn't thought of. There has a few observations about parenting. So if you have an audience as parents, I'm gonna go for it and talk about it. So I
Of course,
think
yeah.
one thing I notice is a tug by parents nowadays, and we're constantly getting these messages um, to identify with our children's accomplishments and achievements and what they do
Yeah.
as a reflection of us in a way that I don't think my parents experienced. God, I hope they didn't feel all my failures were attributable to them.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
my daughter got into college, and so congratulations to me. I'm like, well, why would you have that?
Mm.
I've always wanted to admire my child, not be proud of them. And there's an
Ah,
important difference.
that's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that kind of
I
captures
think that's the role
something.
and function. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd never been able to put it in this framework
Mm.
that you're talking about. So I need to do that. But I had a certain kind of experience, which was, wait, I don't want to be proud. How can I be proud of them? I want to admire them, meaning they've done things that I see them acting authentically. They've done things that matter to them. They've
Yeah.
found fulfillment.
Yeah.
That all
Yeah.
takes courage. And so
Yeah.
I want to be in a position, and I try to say the same with my student staff. I admire these qualities. I mean, it's not that I
Yeah.
don't feel that pride too, but I've just made a conscious effort to do that. I
Yeah.
think another thing about parenting that I've learned, and really coming back to probably related, is I guess if you say, well, what's our function as a parent? What is it fundamentally?
Yeah.
In terms of self-worth, I think there's two pieces. And if I were to do it again, or we'll try to go forward to parent, there's really only one message for every problem with your child. It's the same message over and over and over and again, which is
Mm.
you are safe and I love you. That's it. Whether they fall down and scrape their knee, whether they failed a test, whether they didn't get that job, it's the same message. That's what people need to feel in order to act on their noble impulses, their desires, their pursuits, not from a state of fear. Is that parental fundamental relationship
Yeah.
is solid no matter what
I'm
you
not
do.
going to abandon you. because
Exactly.
yeah, I think
So they
that's
need to feel
so,
loved and they need to feel safe, because once we're in a state of fear,
yeah, then all the
then we
other,
don't even notice love. We don't see it.
no, I think that's such a big deficit in the world of that message, but it's really amazing. No, and I think you're truly unique as this opportunity that you have as a teacher where you teach other teachers to teach, which I just wanted to say that
Mhm.
statement the whole podcast, and which is truly powerful because I mean you can
Yeah.
kind of do you feel in some state when you kind of take a step back that being a parent is very similar to being a teacher in what you do because you have a child now who's an adult and you have these constant adults who are coming to you and then going out into the larger world as teachers, but these people who are your so-called students but are experts in their field. So there's a lot
Hmm.
of this thing, they're like, hey, we know everything. So they might come with this attitude of achievement saying, who's this person trying to teach me about my thing? But you're not teaching them
Right.
about their subject. You're teaching them how to communicate their subject in the most effective way to people who
Yeah.
don't know the subject.
Yeah. Well, I
Okay.
have two people that I'm teaching. Actually, when I think about faculty, the professors, I don't tend to think of them as students. Maybe I should more. I have to explore that. I tend to think of them as peers.
Right,
Like I've
right.
learned some
Okay.
things, you know some things, let's exchange. I'm sure in your field there are comics and you exchange ideas. You probably don't really think of yourself as teaching them in that moment so much as
Mm,
you're improving yourselves, your
yeah.
some shop talk.
As
Um,
comics, sometimes if you teach too much, they just take your jokes.
I can
So there's that
imagine,
little,
yeah.
yeah, there's a little thing of like, let's discuss this premise. And the next thing you hear it on stage going, wait a second.
Uh,
So
uh.
anyway,
But I think so to connect teaching with parenting. So I do have a staff of undergraduate students. And
hmm,
so I actually think it's easier in some ways to teach because there's not these layers and layers of emotion
yeah,
and years of interaction. So I'm not as attached. I'm not as invested in this person. I'm in as for what I want them to do. I'm invested in them. I want them to grow, and so I can be a little more. It's a little less messy. There's less of a
yeah,
dilemma. I'm not. I'm not as. It's not. I'm not. Oh, actually, to use the Eckhart Tolle. It's not my responsibility to prepare them for their future economic viability. And I'm
right.
trying to help them grow and develop and be the kind of people they want to be.
Give them the
And
tools, right? Yeah,
yeah, so I have less attachment to the consequence. Whereas my daughter is going to be my daughter forever, and I'm
yeah,
connected to that. And my part of my feels like my responsibility is for her well being
mm,
in a different way. And so naturally, I would say
yeah,
I'm thinking about that more. And then that
yeah,
if I'm thinking about that, I'm not thinking about where she is in her life right now and her
yeah,
development and growth, for instance. And I think ultimately it's not single-mindedly on that. That's one of the roles I think and functions of parents is to anticipate, to know how the world works and anticipate the adult world. But I think it's really easy to focus on that and not on what it's
mm,
like to be a child and what my
yeah,
role is right now. And I've definitely there are times when I was more focused on the long term than the immediate, and
mm,
so finding that balance as a parent, and but just easier, frankly, for me
yeah.
in the teaching realm.
Right. No, I think when people, when I don't know whether it's sort of ties into this, but when you're sort of more in touch with your self worth, whatever it may be, and you have this sense of it, admiration of someone, um,
Mm,
rather than giving attachment, and you sort of that person's outcome affects you. So if they do well, you get jealous. If they do badly, you
right.
feel good. It really doesn't serve you and your self worth.
Mm-hmm.
But if you
Mm-hmm.
have this sense, okay, I made peace with what I want to do and why I'm doing it and whatever the results may be. I'm going to put in this much effort. So as a result, it might not lead to this particular outcome. There's so many factors. Once you do that, I realized you admire other people, say, okay, cool, this person's put in this much
Mm-hmm.
and they end up
Mm-hmm.
doing that. So, I admire that they've done this and gotten where they have because of that.
And it doesn't diminish me.
It doesn't undermine who I am. Yeah.
Right. And in fact, I can learn from them. I can revel in their achievements
Yeah,
without
yeah,
and appreciate them as a distinct entity beings, I guess, to use Tolle's words, right? They're
yeah,
recognize their being they have
Yes.
roles too, and they, my staff, they have to turn in their timesheets and come to
Yeah.
training and all that stuff. But their being supersedes all of that, and
Mm.
um, so I think that the challenge there is how to take this in a slightly different direction, is how to prioritize that in institutions that are bureaucratic and
Yeah.
big bureaucracies, and we have job descriptions and all that stuff. Is how do you hold on to that humanity,
Yeah.
and particularly when you're working with young people,
Yeah.
and want to develop them into their full humanity,
Yeah.
uh, given that we have these external contingencies and requirements and rules and law. Those are all important
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
but
Now, I want to
they're
ask
not
you.
human. They're not human.
They're not human. This is, I don't know if you have the time, but just want to leave with this one last sort of
Mm-hmm.
idea, because you mentioned in your, when you sent me your bio, that you come from quite a big family,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how is that instrumental, like with having so many siblings, your parents having to share their sense of love and responsibility and their role and function with so many children? How did that shape your desire to get into this space? Teaching, learning, and more importantly, how did it shape your self-worth compared to your siblings, and how did your parents approach parenting for all of you? If
Wow.
you're okay talking about that, sorry.
I have a little reservations, but hey, I trust you, and I'll go forward. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. I'm in my 50s now, and
Mm,
there's some little different moment in my life to be reflective and somewhat some nostalgic, but also, um, I think in terms of the work, my parents were both very civically minded. My dad was a physician,
mm,
and he was definitely driven by the desire to care
mm,
and heal. And those
wow.
are words you don't always hear
Mm,
nowadays. And I don't want to idealize that, but I think that's what I saw. I think he was very powerfully driven by ethics, doing right. My mother was trained as a social worker. She ended up having 9 children, so she didn't do that work as much informally, but so that was instilled. Uh,
yeah, it's such powerful, if you want to call it morals or um, ideals, not ideals,
yeah,
powerful things to see in humans, right? As a child.
yeah, and in particular, so we had this big family, but our house was always open to people. I don't think I mentioned this to you, but we'd always have exchange students staying with us, and
Mm,
um, our house would host people, our friends, for Thanksgiving dinner too.
mm.
I don't know how my mom felt about that, but because there was another bunch of mouths to feed, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
definitely made an impression. And I think so. And then growing up, I was one of 11 people in a shared space. Is definitely a sensitivity to others. So the
Yeah.
positive of that is a sensitivity to others. The negative is for me is a deep sense of self consciousness, very being observed by others, perhaps. And coming
Interesting.
to terms with that. So when we often use the word self-conscious in a negative way, and that's certainly how I thought it most of my life. So for me to stand up in front of a group and talk was just absolutely terrifying, and I avoided it at all costs. And when
Okay,
I did it, I experienced incredible fear. Like literally, I could not speak. Um,
and now you're teaching. You're doing this. I mean, you're public speaking,
yeah,
and yeah, it's amazing, right? Um,
I
it's
mean, I
amazing
was
how.
absolutely terrified during the TEDx talk. I literally was, and I mentioned that. It was not
Yeah, you
hyperbole.
did.
I was
You mentioned
absolutely
that.
terrified.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think there's a kind of there's a side to self. If we just look at the words self-conscious
Hmm.
and kind of pause there for a second, to be aware of oneself, to examine that and
That's
understand that,
it's a good thing, I think.
right? Particularly if
Yeah.
we can then, for me, my interest ultimately is fundamentally is about understanding myself. That's
Yeah.
the pursuit. It sounds very selfish, perhaps, but I think
Yeah.
Ram Dass said, the best thing I could do for you is work on me. Um,
Yeah.
and so I believe that. And then can I take that understanding of my human complexity, my
Hmm.
beingness? I don't know if that's what totally means, and then extend that to you.
Yeah, he says the same thing because he says when you're aware of your ego and you try to look past the ego and don't sort of get triggered or react to what
Right.
people say, to, or rather when the ego tries to take over and react or defend or be aggressive, but you just take a step back and say, I'm not going to react. You kind of, number one, you are dissolving the ego. Second thing, you're contributing to the larger dissolution of dissolution of the larger ego, and the person who would have whose ego would have benefited or would have been got its fill from your ego doesn't have that reaction point. So as a result, it helps their ego dissolve as well. I don't know. It's very complicated.
Yeah. So maybe, so
Yeah.
living in that space, you learn to do that. I think, if nothing else, as I'm the eighth of nine. I just didn't get to make decisions. I didn't get what I wanted and needed and what I wanted a lot of the time. And that's actually a useful thing. It's mixed.
It's mixed, yeah, for sure. Now I'm one of two, so I have no idea how that thing. But sometimes you hear people like, "Oh, it's better off being better off being one of two children, so that way you can." But sometimes I don't think there's no rule to it. But I just I've never spoken to anyone who's a part of such a large family, so it just must be so much on a very fundamental level. You don't feel alone, right? You feel a larger, like a part of a tribe as opposed to a family alone.
Yeah, I think you only know what it's like to be two. I only know what it's like to be one of nine.
Yeah,
Certainly as a kid.
yeah,
I think, and sometimes it's wonderfully supportive to be a part of a tribe, and sometimes it's stultifying and not. And so that I think where I'm right now thinking about that is that's such a rich, powerful, formative experience. That if we can step back and say, well, what did I learn from that? What did I internalize? I didn't even know that I was learning.
yeah.
And then from my point of view, particularly about my worth and where it comes from. And then is that operating now in ways that I would want and that I value and are consistent with what I want to do? And if not, can I do something about that? And I think for a lot of people, we learned in our upbringing that our worth was contingent upon things that we did. So one of the, just the reality of being in a group of nine is you kind of got to follow the rules. So if you stand out, you're a little different, or you don't want to do it, then that's going to be hard for a parent of 9 kids to go, all 9 of you can do whatever you want, and I'm going to validate that. And sure. And that's like, that may be Mowgli, where then it's the jungle. Okay. So there's a lot of pressures on parents to do that. But what does that feel like as a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or whatever? So it's complicated.
It's very, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and thank you so much for, I didn't, of course, if this, didn't want to make it uncomfortable, too personal, but thank you for answering it. And I think, it's great, the amount you've shared and the time you've taken, and the fact that you've, come on the podcast and spoken about what you've studied and continue to do so, and what you've learned, and shared all that for everyone listening to this right now. Nic, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And, appreciate you being so helpful and so spontaneous with agreeing to doing this. So on behalf of everyone listening, and from me to you, appreciate it and thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share ideas that I was very lucky to receive from, and I should mention this, from my mentor, Professor Marty Covington. I just feel privileged to be able to share it. And if it helps somebody else, it's a cliche, but that's what I'm trying to do.
That's amazing. So people can find, can you just drop them of where they can find your work, your book, your social media presence, if you have that, so they can follow you and they can, they can continue this journey from where we leave this off.
Yeah. One of the reasons I was reluctant to talk about what it's like in the world these days around social media is I don't really participate in social media very much. So I have a LinkedIn account. You can follow me. There's a YouTube recording, video of my TEDx talk, TEDx Princeton. It's called The Hidden Key to Understanding Procrastination by Nic Voge. And if you put a comment there or a question, I'll actually answer it in the comments. And I've been told I'm crazy to do that, but it's kind of fun. So those are the best ways. I am planning on developing a course that spins out of that talk, just in part because of the response from people and requests. And that's in the development.
Brilliant. So Nic Voge, you're on LinkedIn and on YouTube. You must check out Nic's video. Of course, it's got a lot of views, but I don't think there'll be any harm in it getting 3 times or 100 times the number it already has. I think everyone can benefit from it. And I hope all of you like the episode. And once again, appreciate it, Nic. Thank you.
Thank you, and keep up the great work. It's really important conversations.
Thank you.